What if I told you the people who bother you most aren't actually your problem? That every insult, every betrayal, every moment someone tried to diminish you, none of it ever touched the real you. I spent decades on battlefields and in Germania, surrounded by flatterers and assassins in marble halls, and I learned something that sounds impossible. You can be completely free while everyone around you is trying to control you. The prison isn't other people. It's the story you tell yourself about what they mean. And once you see that story for what it is, just vapor, just smoke, you'll wonder why you ever gave them the keys. I'm Marcus Aurelius, and if you know anything about me, you know I wasn't just some philosopher sitting in a quiet room thinking peaceful thoughts. I was the emperor of Rome. I commanded armies. I made decisions that determined whether thousands of people lived or died. I dealt with senators who smiled to my face and plotted behind my back. I had advisors who lied to me, generals who betrayed me, and family members who disappointed me in ways that still make my chest tight when I think about them. I lost children. I watched people I loved suffer. I stood in front of crowds who cheered for me one day and cursed me the next. And through all of that, I had to figure out how to stay sane, how to stay centered, how to not let the chaos outside become chaos inside. Because here's the thing, when you're responsible for an empire, you don't get to fall apart every time someone insults you or disappoints you or tries to manipulate you. You have to find a way to stand in the middle of the storm without becoming the storm. That's what this video is about. It's not about becoming some cold, emotionless robot who doesn't care about anything. It's not about pretending nothing matters or that people can't hurt you. It's about understanding something so fundamental, so true, that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that understanding changes everything. You're exhausted, aren't you? Exhausted from caring what people think. Every criticism feels like a verdict on your entire existence. Every conflict leaves you replaying conversations for days, sometimes weeks, imagining better comebacks, wondering why you couldn't just stay calm in the moment. You've tried not caring, but it feels fake, like you're just pushing everything down until it explodes later. You've tried setting boundaries, but somehow people still get under your skin. They still have this power over you that you can't quite shake. And the worst part is, you start to think there's something wrong with you. You think, why am I so sensitive? Why do I let things bother me so much? Other people seem fine. Other people seem to just brush things off. What's wrong with me? Let me tell you something. Nothing is wrong with you. You're not too sensitive. You're not weak. You're not broken. You've just been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about how this whole thing works. And that misunderstanding is costing you your peace every single day. The real problem isn't that you care too much. It's that nobody taught you the difference between experiencing an emotion and being controlled by it. Nobody taught you that being bothered isn't really about what happens to you. It's about a misunderstanding of what you even are. Most advice tells you to build thicker skin, to develop armor, to protect yourself better. I'm going to show you something completely different. I'm going to show you why you never needed armor in the first place. Because the part of you that can actually be harmed doesn't exist the way you think it does. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. I need you to hear that. This is about recognizing that your peace isn't fragile, your idea of yourself is. Your sense of who you are, your identity, your reputation, your image, that's what's fragile. That's what shatters when someone criticizes you or rejects you or misunderstands you. But you are not that image. You never were. And when that understanding finally lands, when you really see it, people's words and actions lose their power automatically. Not because you're forcing yourself not to care, not because you're suppressing your feelings, but because you finally see reality clearly. You see what's actually happening when someone bothers you. And once you see it, you can't be bothered the same way ever again. Now, here's what makes this different from everything else you've heard. Modern advice says, set boundaries, practice self-care, don't let them win, stand up for yourself, don't be a doormat. All of that is about external solutions to an internal misunderstanding. It's all about managing the situation, controlling the circumstances, getting people to behave differently so you can finally feel okay. But Stoicism isn't a coping mechanism. It's not a technique. It's a fundamental reframe of what's actually happening when someone bothers you. I'm not going to teach you how to manage your reactions better. I'm not going to give you scripts for dealing with difficult people. I'm going to show you why the whole framework of me versus them, why the whole idea of you being under attack, is the source of your suffering in the first place. Most people think being unbothered means you don't care. That's the myth we need to destroy right now. The truth is that unbothered people care deeply. They care about what's right. They care about other people. They care about living with integrity. They've just stopped making other people's behavior mean something about themselves. They've stopped outsourcing their stability to whether someone approves of them, understands them, or behaves correctly toward them. You think you need people to change for you to find peace. That's the trap. That's the prison. Because as long as your peace depends on other people being different, you're not free. You're a hostage. You're waiting for permission to be okay, and that permission might never come. But peace was always available. Right now, in this moment, even in chaos, especially in chaos. That's what I want to show you. Not how to cope with chaos, but how to stand in it completely free. Let me tell you about a specific day that changed everything for me. This was several years into my reign, and I was dealing with the Senate. If you don't know Roman politics, just understand this. The Senate was full of people who were brilliant at appearing loyal while undermining you at every turn. They were masters of the subtle insult, the veiled threat, the political maneuvering that could destroy you without ever breaking a single law. There was this one senator, a man I'd actually respected at one point. His name isn't important. What's important is that he'd been a trusted advisor, someone I'd confided in about difficult decisions. And on this particular day, in front of the entire Senate, he stood up and accused me of weakness. He said I'd chosen diplomacy over war with a neighboring territory, and that my softness was going to be the downfall of Rome. He called me unfit to wear the purple. He suggested that maybe the gods had cursed Rome by giving them an emperor who writes poetry instead of leading armies. The room went completely silent, and I'm sitting there on the emperor's seat, and I can feel every eye on me. They're all watching to see what I'll do. Will I defend myself? Will I lash out? Will I have him arrested? Will I do what emperors before me had done and make an example of him? And I felt this heat rising in my chest. You know that feeling, right? That physical sensation when someone attacks you in public, when they try to humiliate you in front of people whose opinions matter. It's like your whole body is screaming at you to fight back, to defend yourself, to prove them wrong. But then something shifted. And this is what I want you to understand. It wasn't because I was stronger than the feeling. It wasn't because I suppressed it or pushed it down. It was because, in that moment, I started watching the feeling instead of being the feeling. I observed it. I noticed the heat in my chest, the tension in my jaw, the way my hands wanted to clench into fists. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Look at what's happening in my body right now. Look at this automatic response. And then I looked at him, really looked at him. And you know what I saw? I saw fear. Underneath all that anger, underneath all that righteous indignation, I saw a man who was terrified. Terrified of becoming irrelevant. Terrified that the world was changing in ways he couldn't control. Terrified that maybe the old ways, the ways he'd built his entire identity around, weren't working anymore. His attack on me wasn't about me at all. It was about his fear. He was trying to reassert his power, his relevance, his version of how things should be. And he'd chosen me as the target because that's what frightened people do. They find something external to attack so they don't have to face what's happening internally. I saw all of that in maybe 5 seconds. And in seeing it, something extraordinary happened. The heat in my chest just dissolved. Not because I forced it to, but because I understood what was actually happening. This man wasn't attacking Marcus Aurelius, the person. He was attacking Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, the symbol, the representation of changes he didn't like. He was arguing with his own fear, and I just happened to be standing in front of him when he decided to externalize it. So I did something that nobody expected. I thanked him. Not sarcastically, not with that fake political courtesy that everyone sees through. I genuinely thanked him for his honesty, for his concern about Rome's future, for his willingness to speak what he believed was true, even when it was uncomfortable. And then I said something that I'd been thinking about for weeks, but hadn't quite articulated until that moment. I said, when someone attacks us, when they try to diminish us or hurt us, they're not really engaging with us. They're engaging with a version of us that exists in their mind, a story they've told themselves about who we are and what we represent. And that story, that version of us, it's not real. It's never been real. It's just their interpretation, their projection, their way of making sense of a world that's always more complicated than our stories about it. I said, I could spend the rest of this session defending myself against your version of me, trying to convince you that your story is wrong. But that would be like arguing with a dream someone had about me. What would be the point? You're going to believe what you need to believe, and I'm going to continue doing what I think is right. Those two things can exist at the same time without either of us being destroyed by it. The room stayed silent, but it was a different kind of silence. And that senator, he just sat down. He didn't apologize, didn't take it back, but something shifted in him. I could see it. Because when you respond to an attack with understanding instead of defense, you don't give people anything to push against. You just reflect back to them what's actually happening. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because my mind was racing with this understanding. I'd spent so much of my life trying to control how people saw me, trying to defend my reputation, trying to make sure everyone understood my intentions. And suddenly I saw how exhausting that was, how impossible, how completely beside the point. I got up and I wrote something in my journal, something that became one of the most important insights of my entire philosophy. I wrote, when people insult you, they're rehearsing for their own judgment. Be the mirror that shows them themselves without distortion. What I meant was this: when someone attacks you, they're revealing everything about themselves and nothing about you. They're showing you their values, their fears, their pain points, their standards, their wounds. And if you can see that clearly, if you can be still enough to just reflect it back without adding your own distortion, without defending or attacking back, something remarkable happens. They're forced to see themselves, and that's often the most powerful response you can give. But here's the thing that really struck me. I realized that I'd stopped being bothered not because I'd won some battle with this senator, not because I'd proven anything or changed his mind. I'd stopped being bothered because I'd stopped participating in the game he was trying to play. He wanted to make this about whether I was a good emperor or a bad emperor, whether I was strong or weak. And I just stepped out of that entire framework. I refused to defend the image he was attacking because I'd recognized that image was never me in the first place. That's what I mean when I say the prison isn't other people. The prison is the story you tell yourself about what they mean. This senator couldn't actually harm me. He could harm my reputation, maybe. He could influence some people's opinions. He could make things politically more difficult. But he couldn't touch the part of me that was actually me. He couldn't touch my ability to think clearly, to act with integrity, to choose how I responded. He couldn't take away my inner freedom unless I gave it to him, unless I made his opinion more important than my own knowing, unless I let his story about me become my story about me. And that's where we give our power away every single time. We hand over the keys to our peace to people who don't even know they're holding them. Now let me tell you about something else I learned, something that's going to sound strange at first, but stay with me. I learned it from watching a river. I know that sounds overly poetic for someone who's supposed to be talking about real life and real problems, but I need you to picture this with me because it's important. I was on campaign in Germania, and we'd set up camp near this river. It was winter, and the water was freezing cold, just rushing past with this relentless force. And I'm sitting there one morning, watching it, and I notice all this stuff flowing past. There's clear water, muddy water, branches, leaves, sometimes dead fish, sometimes chunks of ice. The river just carries it all downstream without any kind of judgment or preference. And I'm watching this, and I start thinking about how the river never takes any of it personally. The mud doesn't offend the river. The ice doesn't hurt the river's feelings. It all just flows through. The river is just being a river, doing what rivers do, and all this stuff is just passing through it. And then it hit me, people are exactly like that river. They're moving through their own currents. Their fear, their pain, their conditioning, their confusion, their wounds, their joys, their desperations, all of it flowing through them constantly. And when someone lashes out at you, when someone disappoints you, when someone betrays you, they're not really responding to you, they're responding to their internal weather. You just happened to be standing there when their river was carrying something heavy. Think about how often you take things personally that have absolutely nothing to do with you. Someone's in a bad mood and snaps at you, you think it's about you. Someone doesn't text back quickly, you think they're mad at you. Someone criticizes your work, you think they're saying you're inadequate. But what if they're just carrying their own stuff downstream? What if their snap was about the argument they had with their partner that morning? What if their slow text was because they're overwhelmed and drowning? What if their criticism was about their own perfectionism and fear of failure? The mistake we make over and over is thinking we're special enough to be the cause of other people's storms. We're not. We're just in the river with them, and they're in the river with us. And we're all carrying our own stuff downstream, and sometimes it bumps into other people, and sometimes other people's stuff bumps into us. But here's the deeper truth, the part that really changes everything. You can't control the river. You can't make it warmer or clearer. You can't stop the debris from flowing, but you can decide whether to brace against it or move with it. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think Stoicism is about bracing against everything, becoming this unmovable rock that nothing can touch. But rocks in rivers still get worn down. They still get battered. They might last a long time, but they're in constant resistance. What I'm talking about is different. I'm talking about being the awareness that watches the river. Not the thing in the river, not the thing resisting the river, but the consciousness that observes it all without being swept away by it. Because you are not your body being touched by cold water. You are not your emotions being triggered by someone's behavior. You are the awareness that notices all of it happening. And when you recognize that, when you really get that distinction, something profound shifts. You realize you were never in danger. The water can't actually harm the awareness. The debris can't injure the consciousness that's watching. The part of you that's aware of being bothered can never itself be bothered. It's just aware. It's just noticing. And in that noticing, there's complete freedom. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, Marcus, this all sounds beautiful and philosophical, but what about when someone actually hurts me? What about when someone I love betrays me? What about when I get fired or rejected or humiliated? What about when it's not just some random person being rude, but someone whose opinion actually matters to me? And that's exactly what we need to talk about. Because this isn't about denying that things hurt. This isn't about pretending you don't have feelings or that people can't impact your life. This is about understanding what's actually happening when you hurt, so you can respond to it consciously instead of reactively. So let me break this down into 7 principles, 7 rules if you want to call them that, although they're really more like lenses or perspectives that bring reality into focus. Because once you see clearly, right action becomes obvious. You're not controlling yourself anymore. You're not forcing yourself to behave a certain way. You're just aligned with what is, and from that alignment, everything flows naturally. The first principle is this: separate the event from the story. This is the most important thing I can teach you, and it's the foundation for everything else. Something happens, that's the event. Your mind immediately adds meaning to it. That's the story. The event is neutral. The story creates the suffering. Let me give you a concrete example. Someone cancels plans with you. That's the event, a factual occurrence. Plans that existed are now cancelled. But watch what your mind does immediately. It goes, "They don't value me. I'm not important enough. They probably found something better to do. They don't really want to be my friend. They're pulling away. This means something about me, about my worth, about my place in their life." See all of that? That's the story. And the entire wound, the entire source of your pain, lives in the gap between the event and the story. The event already happened, and it's over. You're being bothered by your own narration of what it means. And here's what's wild: the stories feel absolutely true. They feel like facts. They feel like you're just seeing reality clearly. But you're not. You're seeing your interpretation of reality, filtered through all your past experiences, your insecurities, your beliefs about how people should behave, your need for control and certainty. The event is plans cancelled. That's it. That's all that actually happened. Everything else is you filling in blanks with assumptions that might be completely wrong. Maybe they cancelled because they're overwhelmed and needed space. Maybe they cancelled because of something going on in their life that has nothing to do with you. Maybe they cancelled because they're depressed and can barely get out of bed. Maybe they cancelled for reasons you'll never know and don't need to know. But your story is about you. Your story makes it about your inadequacy, your worthiness, your value. And that's what creates the suffering, not the cancelled plans. The story you told about what the cancelled plans mean. So the practice here is to start catching yourself in that gap. When something bothers you, stop and ask yourself, what actually happened? Just the facts, like you're describing it to a court. And then, what story am I telling myself about what happened? What meaning am I adding? What interpretation am I making? And most of the time, you'll find that what's bothering you isn't what happened, it's your story about what happened. The event is just an event. Your story turned it into evidence of something, usually something negative about you. And here's the thing, I'm not saying your stories are never accurate. Sometimes they are. Sometimes someone cancels because they don't value you. Sometimes criticism is meant to hurt you. Sometimes betrayal is exactly what it looks like. I'm not telling you to gaslight yourself into thinking nothing bad ever happens. But even when the story is accurate, even when someone genuinely is trying to hurt you or genuinely doesn't value you, separating the event from the story gives you power. Because now you're dealing with reality instead of your triggered interpretation of reality. You can respond consciously. You can make clear decisions about what you want to do with this information. If someone genuinely doesn't value you, that's useful information. You can decide to invest less in that relationship. You can create distance. You can adjust your expectations. But you don't need to make it mean you're unlovable. You don't need to spiral into all the old stories about why people always leave or why you're never enough. You can just hold the fact, this person, for whatever reason, isn't capable of valuing me the way I want to be valued. That's information about them and about the mismatch between us. It's not a verdict on my inherent worth. This is what I mean by separating the event from the story. The event is what happened. The story is what you make it mean. And most of your suffering lives in the second part. I spent years of my life carrying wounds that were really just stories I kept telling myself about events that had already passed. My father died when I was young. That's the event. But the story I told myself for years was that I'd been abandoned, that I wasn't enough to make him want to stay, that I had to prove myself worthy of the position I'd inherited because I hadn't earned it the way he would have wanted me to. None of that was true. My father died because bodies fail. He died because disease doesn't care about your lineage or your potential or how much your son needs you. The event was just death, which is natural and inevitable and has been happening since the beginning of time. But my story about it, that story created decades of unnecessary suffering. And when I finally saw that gap, when I finally separated the event from the story, I could grieve the actual loss without carrying the false burden of all the meaning I'd added to it. The grief was clean then. It was real and human and appropriate. But it wasn't contaminated with self-judgment and inadequacy and all the other poison I'd been mixing into it. So that's the first principle. Separate the event from the story. Notice the gap. Most of what bothers you lives in that gap, not in what actually happened. Now, the second principle builds directly on that first one, and it's going to challenge you even more. Here it is. Other people's opinions are none of your business. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, like you should be arrogant or dismissive. I mean it literally. Their opinion is about them, not about you, and therefore it's not actually your concern. When someone judges you, they're revealing their values, their fears, their standards, their conditioning. They're telling you about their internal world, their measuring sticks, their priorities, none of which you chose, none of which you control. Let me break this down because it's subtle and most people miss it. Someone says you're too sensitive. What are they actually saying? They're saying that in their worldview, in their value system, sensitivity is a weakness or a problem. That's information about them. That's information about what they've numbed in themselves, about what they've learned to suppress, about what they need to do to feel safe in the world. Someone says you're too cold, too detached. Again, what are they revealing? They're revealing that they need emotional expressiveness to feel connected. They're revealing their own wounds around abandonment or neglect. They're revealing what they need from others to feel secure. Someone says you're a failure. They're revealing how they measure success. They're revealing their own fears about inadequacy. They're revealing the standards they've internalized, probably from their own parents or their culture, about what makes a life valuable. Do you see? None of those judgments are actually about you. They're about the person making them. They're about the lens they're looking through, the filter they've placed over reality. And you can't control that filter. You didn't install it, and you can't remove it. You are free the moment you stop auditioning for a role in other people's stories about you. Because that's all an opinion is, it's someone else's story. They're writing a story about you based on their limited information, their biases, their needs, their fears, and they're probably going to write that story whether you cooperate with it or not. Now here's where this gets really challenging, and this is where most people resist. This applies to praise as well. You can't selectively reject criticism while clinging to compliments. Both are equally external. Both come from other people's perspectives and values and needs. Both keep you dependent on others' perceptions to know if you're okay. If someone's criticism of you isn't really about you, then their praise isn't really about you either. It's about what they value, what they need, what they're projecting onto you. And if you need their praise to feel good about yourself, you're just as trapped as if you're devastated by their criticism. True freedom is standing in your own knowing, regardless of applause or contempt. It's having an internal reference point that doesn't shift based on external feedback. Not because you're arrogant or don't care what people think, but because you recognize that what people think is actually not accessible to you anyway. You can never truly know what's happening in someone else's mind. You can never control their interpretation. So why build your sense of self on such unstable ground? I had to learn this the hard way. As emperor, I was surrounded by people whose entire job was to have opinions about me. The Senate had opinions, the army had opinions, The people in the streets had opinions. Foreign leaders had opinions. My own family had opinions. And those opinions were all different, often contradictory, sometimes deliberately malicious, sometimes genuinely trying to be helpful. And for a while, I tried to manage all of it. I tried to be what the Senate needed me to be, what the army needed me to be, what the people needed me to be. I tried to craft my image, control the narrative, make sure everyone understood my intentions. And it was exhausting. More than that, it was impossible. Because you can't be all things to all people. Every choice you make will disappoint someone. Every decision will confirm someone's worst opinion of you. So I had to make a choice. Either I could keep trying to manage everyone's perception and lose myself in the process, or I could let their opinions be what they are and focus on the only thing I actually had control over, my own integrity. And when I made that shift, when I really accepted that their opinions were their business and not mine, something extraordinary happened. I became more effective, not less. Because I wasn't making decisions based on how they'd be perceived, I was making decisions based on what I actually thought was right. And people respected that. Not everyone, not even most people maybe, but the right people did. The people whose opinions were actually worth considering, the people who were wise and thoughtful and genuinely cared about Rome, those people respected that I had an internal compass. They might disagree with my decisions, but they trusted that I was making them with integrity. The people who didn't respect it, the people who wanted me to be a certain way for their own purposes, those people were never going to be satisfied anyway. So why was I trying to please them? This is what I mean when I say other people's opinions are none of your business. You can't control them, you can't fully know them, and they're not really about you anyway. So let them be. Let people think what they think. You just focus on being who you actually are, living by your actual values, making choices you can actually stand behind. Which brings me to the third principle. Virtue is the only measure that matters. And by virtue, I don't mean some abstract philosophical concept. I mean something very specific: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control. Those are the four cardinal virtues in Stoic philosophy, and they're the only measuring stick that's actually reliable. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be popular or successful or admired. You're here to act with integrity, to be wise, which means seeing clearly and thinking well. To be just, which means treating people fairly and acting with goodness. To be courageous, which means doing what's right, even when it's hard or scary. And to be temperate, which means having self-control and not being swept away by every impulse or desire. When you're rooted in virtue, when that's your actual measuring stick, other people's responses become interesting data, but not determinative of your worth, because you're answering a different question. You're not asking, did people like what I did? You're asking, did I do the right thing? Did I act with integrity? Did I use wisdom to the best of my ability? And if the answer is yes, if you genuinely did the best you could with the information and resources and wisdom you had at the time, then you're free. The results aren't up to you. The reception isn't up to you. How people interpret your actions, whether they approve or disapprove, whether they understand your intentions or misunderstand them completely, none of that is up to you. Only the quality of your character in this moment, only the virtue or lack of virtue in your actual choices. That's your domain. That's what you're responsible for. Everything else is external, and externals are not up to you. This is why truly virtuous people are unbothered. Not because they're numb or don't care, but because they're accountable to something higher than social approval. They've chosen a different judge. They're measuring themselves against wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, not against popularity or success or admiration. And here's the relief in that you're no longer in a popularity contest. You're in an integrity contest with yourself, and the rules are clear. Did I act with wisdom? Did I speak truth with kindness? Did I stand firm when it mattered? Did I control myself when I wanted to lash out? If yes, then you're whole. You're complete. You're enough, regardless of what anyone says about it. And if no, if you messed up, if you acted from ego or fear or reactivity, then you have something real to work on. You have actual growth to do. You don't need someone else's opinion to tell you that. You know it yourself. This is such a different way of living, and it takes practice because we're so conditioned to look outside ourselves for validation. We're so trained to measure our worth by external metrics: success, approval, achievement, recognition. But those metrics are inherently unstable. They're dependent on things you can't control. They shift with trends and moods and circumstances. Virtue doesn't shift. Wisdom is wisdom whether people recognize it or not. Justice is justice whether it's popular or not. Courage is courage whether anyone sees it or not. Temperance is temperance whether you're rewarded for it or not. And when you root yourself there, when that becomes your real measuring stick, you find a stability that nothing external can shake. Because you're not dependent on conditions being a certain way. You're not waiting for people to validate you. You're validating yourself by living according to your deepest values. Now here's where people often get confused. They think this means you become a rigid moralist who's always certain you're right and everyone else is wrong. That's not what I'm talking about at all. In fact, wisdom, one of the 4 virtues, includes humility. It includes recognizing how much you don't know, how limited your perspective is, how often you're going to get things wrong. Being rooted in virtue doesn't mean being certain, it means being committed. Committed to truth-seeking, to fairness, to courage, to self-control. And part of that commitment is being willing to admit when you're wrong, to learn from feedback, to adjust when you get new information. But there's a huge difference between genuinely learning from feedback and being tossed around by every opinion. One comes from wisdom and humility, the other comes from insecurity and people-pleasing. When I made a decision that turned out to be wrong, when I got information that showed me I'd misunderstood something or acted from incomplete knowledge, I could adjust. I could admit the mistake. Not because someone's opinion of me had shifted, but because the facts had shifted, and wisdom requires responding to new facts. But when someone criticized me simply because they didn't like my decision, simply because it didn't serve their interests or align with their values, I didn't need to adjust. I could consider their perspective. I could learn from it if there was something to learn, but I didn't need to change course just to please them. Do you see the difference? One is being responsive to reality. The other is being reactive to opinion. Virtue requires the first. It rejects the second. So that's the third principle. Virtue is your only reliable measure. Everything else is noise. Now, the fourth principle is going to give you so much relief if you can really absorb it. Here it is. Hurt people, and it's never actually about you. Everyone, and I mean everyone, is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That person who snapped at you, they're carrying something you can't see. That betrayal that felt so personal, it was about their fear, their wounds, their limitations, not about your inadequacy. This doesn't excuse bad behavior. This is important. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to tolerate ongoing abuse. It doesn't mean you can't have boundaries. It doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. But it does mean you stop internalizing other people's damage as evidence of your deficiency. And that changes everything. When you really understand that hurt people, when you really see that people's behavior is almost always about their own pain and not about you, you stop taking things so personally, not in a defensive way, like you're trying to convince yourself you don't care, but in a factual way. You see the causality clearly. Someone betrays you. Why? Because they're in so much pain themselves that they can't see past their own survival. They're so hurt that they hurt others without even realizing they're doing it. Or they realize it, but they're so desperate for relief from their own suffering that they'll do anything, even something that hurts you. Someone is cruel to you. Why? Because cruelty is what happens when someone's pain overflows and they have no healthy way to process it. They're projecting their self-hatred outward. They're trying to make someone else feel the smallness they feel. They're attempting to control something, anything, because they feel so out of control internally. Someone rejects you. Why? Usually because they're scared. Scared of intimacy, scared of being hurt themselves, scared of inadequacy, scared of commitment, scared of being seen. Their rejection is about their fear, not about your lovability. When you see this clearly, compassion becomes automatic. Not the soft, enabling kind of compassion that lets people walk all over you, but the fierce, boundaried kind. The kind that says, I see your suffering, and I'm not going to take your behavior as evidence of my worth, but I'm also not going to stay in the line of fire. You can hold both truths simultaneously. You can understand someone's pain and still protect yourself from their behavior. You can have compassion for their struggle and still say, I'm not available to be your punching bag. I understand you're hurting, but you need to find another way to process that hurt that doesn't involve harming me. This is so different from how most people operate. Most people either take everything personally and spiral into self-blame, or they completely dehumanize the other person and write them off as toxic or evil. Both of those responses miss what's actually happening. The person who hurt you is a human being struggling with their own demons, making choices from their own limitations, acting out their own unhealed wounds. That doesn't make their behavior okay, but it does mean their behavior isn't a statement about your value. And when you can see that, when you can really hold that understanding, you become so much more effective in relationships, because you're responding to what's real, not to your triggered story about what's real. Someone lashes out at you, and instead of getting defensive or collapsing into shame, you can think, they're overwhelmed right now. This isn't about me. How do I want to respond to an overwhelmed person? Maybe I give them space. Maybe I set a boundary calmly. Maybe I offer support if they're open to it. But I don't take on their emotion as mine. I don't make their behavior mean something about me. This is such a powerful shift, because suddenly you're not constantly being buffeted by other people's moods and behaviors. You're stable. You're grounded. You can see what's happening clearly and respond consciously. I learned this later than I wish I had. I spent a lot of years taking people's behavior personally, especially betrayals from people I trusted. I'd think, how could they do this to me? What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough to make them choose differently? And all of those questions were predicated on a false assumption that their behavior was primarily about me. It wasn't. It was primarily about them, about their fears, their limitations, their wounds, their confusion. When I finally understood that, really understood it, I could grieve the loss of relationships without carrying the burden of self-blame. I could be disappointed in people's choices without making those choices mean something about my worthiness. I could protect myself without hating them. That's the freedom in this principle. You're not responsible for other people's behavior. You're not the cause of it. Even when they tell you that you are, even when they blame you for their choices, it's not true. People are responsible for their own choices, always. And their choices, especially their harmful choices, come from their own pain. Your only responsibility is how you respond. Do you respond with wisdom? Do you protect yourself while maintaining your own integrity? Do you avoid becoming someone who hurts others because you were hurt? That's in your control. That's your work. Everything else, why they did it, what it means about them, whether they'll ever understand or apologize or change, none of that is in your control, and therefore, none of it needs to be your focus. The fifth principle is about power, and it's going to clarify what I mean by control. Here it is. You can't control people, only your response. We do this desperate thing as humans. We try to control others through argument, through manipulation, through withdrawal, through punishment, through pleading, through explaining. We think if we can just find the right words, the right leverage, the right approach, they'll finally change, they'll finally see, they'll finally become who we need them to be. They won't. Not because of you, anyway. People change when they're ready to change, when their own pain becomes greater than their resistance to change, when they have their own realization that shifts their perspective. You can't force that. You can't argue someone into being different. And every moment you spend trying to control someone else is a moment you're not spending on the only thing that actually matters, becoming who you're meant to be. This is the tragedy I see over and over. People outsourcing their power to others, spending years trying to make a parent understand them, trying to make a partner love them better, trying to make a friend respect them. And meanwhile, their own life is on hold, waiting for someone else to change so they can finally move forward. But here's the empowering truth that lives alongside that tragedy. You have complete control over the only thing that actually matters. How you meet this moment, how you respond to what's happening, whether you act from wisdom or from reactivity, whether you maintain your integrity or compromise it. You can't make someone respect you, but you can decide to respect yourself regardless. You can't force understanding, but you can choose clarity for yourself. You can't make someone love you, but you can choose to stop betraying yourself for scraps of conditional affection. Every moment you spend trying to change someone else is a moment you're not becoming who you could be. That's the opportunity cost. That's what you're sacrificing when you focus on what's outside your control. So the practice here is simple but profound. Before reacting to anything, pause and ask, what's inside my control right now? And usually the answer is very simple. Your breath, your next word, your integrity, your choice to stay or leave, your choice to engage or create distance, your choice to speak or be silent. Start there. Take the action that's actually available to you. Stop exhausting yourself trying to control variables that were never yours to control. I wasted so much energy early in my reign trying to make the Senate understand my vision, trying to make certain generals loyal, trying to make Rome into something it wasn't ready to become. And all of that effort, all of that struggle, it created so much unnecessary suffering. The shift happened when I stopped trying to control their choices and focused on making my choices as wise and just as I could. I presented my vision clearly. I acted with integrity. I made decisions based on what I thought was right, not based on what I thought would be popular. And sometimes people came along. Sometimes they understood. Sometimes my actions inspired change in others. But that was never the goal. The goal was to be who I was called to be, to do what I was called to do, regardless of whether anyone else understood or approved or cooperated. That's where your power actually lives. Not in controlling external circumstances, but in choosing your character regardless of external circumstances. Now, the sixth principle is the one that confuses people most, because it sounds contradictory. But stay with me, because this is where everything comes together. Here it is. Love people exactly as they are, then decide. How can you be unbothered and still care? How can you accept people while maintaining boundaries? It sounds impossible, but it's not. It's actually the most mature form of love. You love people as they are right now, flawed, confused, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, always human. You don't need them to be different to extend compassion. You don't need them to change to see their inherent humanity. You accept what is. This person is exactly who they're showing you they are right now, in this moment. But acceptance isn't agreement. Acceptance is acknowledging reality. It's saying, I see clearly who this person is and what they're capable of right now. I'm not arguing with reality. I'm not insisting they be someone they're not. And from that place of clear seeing, you make decisions. Do I want this person in my life? Do I want to be close to them, or do I need distance? Do I trust them with my heart, or do I need to protect it? Can I accept them as they are, or is the gap between who they are and what I need too large? But you're deciding from clarity, not from hope, not from the potential you see in them, not from who they could be if they just worked on themselves, from who they actually are right now as they're showing you. This is such a different approach than what most people do. Most people love potential. They love the version of someone that doesn't exist yet. They love who this person could be if they just healed this wound or worked on this issue or finally understood this truth. And then they're confused and hurt when that potential doesn't materialize. They feel betrayed when the person doesn't become who they were hoping they'd become. But the person never promised to become that. You projected that onto them. Loving people as they are means loving the actual human in front of you, not the fantasy version you've constructed. And when you do that, you can make clear decisions. This person drinks too much and becomes mean. That's who they are right now. I can have compassion for whatever pain is driving that behavior. I can hope they get help. I can support them if they decide to change. But I don't have to stay close to that behavior. I can love them from a distance. I can protect myself while still wishing them well. This person is emotionally unavailable. That's who they are right now. I can understand why maybe they're scared, maybe they've been hurt, maybe they're not capable of more. I can have compassion for that. But I don't have to stay in a relationship that doesn't meet my needs. I can accept them as they are, and also accept that what they can offer isn't what I need. Do you see? Love and boundaries aren't opposites. They're complementary. You can honor someone's humanity while refusing their behavior access to yours. You can wish someone well while choosing not to be close to them. The liberation in this is enormous. Because when you stop needing people to change, you stop being held hostage by potential. You stop investing years into relationships, hoping the person will finally become who you need them to be. You see them now, as is, and you choose accordingly. That's love. Seeing clearly and choosing consciously. Not needing someone to be different for you to extend basic human compassion, but also not betraying yourself by staying in situations that harm you. And here's what's interesting when you love people this way. When you accept them without needing them to change, sometimes they actually do change, not because you needed them to, but because acceptance creates space for growth in a way that pressure never does. When people feel accepted as they are, they're less defensive, they're less resistant. They can actually look at themselves honestly because they're not spending all their energy defending against your judgment or expectation. But that can't be your motivation. You can't accept people as a strategy to change them. That's just manipulation with a spiritual veneer. You accept people because that's what's real. That's what is. And from that acceptance, you decide what you want to do. This brings me to the seventh and final principle, the one that ties everything together. And if you only remember one thing from this entire conversation, let it be this: your peace is your responsibility, not their achievement. Nobody can give you peace. Therefore, nobody can take it away. Read that again. If someone's words destroy your calm, the calm was never yours to begin with. It was conditional on their behavior. That's not peace. That's just a temporary absence of conflict. Real peace exists independent of conditions. It's the ground beneath the earthquake. It's the sky beyond the storm. It's available to you right now in the middle of chaos because it was never dependent on chaos ending. This is probably the most important thing I learned in my entire life, and I learned it way too late. For years, I thought peace was something I had to achieve by arranging circumstances correctly. If I could just get the Senate to cooperate, if I could just win this war, if I could just solve this problem, then I could be at peace. But peace kept eluding me. Because there was always another Senate session, always another war, always another problem. The conditions were never perfect. The circumstances were never fully arranged. There was always something disturbing the peace I was trying to create. And then one night, exhausted and frustrated, I had this realization: I'm doing this backwards. I'm trying to arrange the world so I can finally be okay. But what if I needed to be okay so I could finally engage the world freely? What if peace wasn't the result of perfect conditions? What if peace was the foundation from which I met imperfect conditions? That reversed everything for me. Because suddenly I wasn't waiting for permission to be at peace. I wasn't waiting for things to settle down, for people to behave correctly, for problems to be solved. I could choose peace right now, in the middle of mess, because peace wasn't about the absence of difficulty, it was about the presence of clarity. When you understand that your peace is your responsibility, you stop waiting for external conditions to grant it to you. You stop thinking, I'll be at peace when my parents apologize, when my ex stops being difficult, when I get that promotion, when people finally understand me, when I'm healed enough, when I'm good enough. None of those things are required for peace. Peace is available right now. Not because everything is perfect, but because peace was never about everything being perfect. Peace is about seeing clearly. It's about understanding what's in your control and what isn't. It's about separating events from stories. It's about recognizing that other people's opinions are about them. It's about being rooted in virtue instead of validation. It's about understanding that hurt people hurt people. It's about taking responsibility for your responses. It's about loving people as they are while protecting yourself wisely. All of those things are available right now, not someday, right now. You don't need to wait for apologies that might never come. You don't need to wait for understanding from people who might never be capable of it. You don't need to wait for circumstances to align, or for people to change, or for enough time to pass, or for anything external to happen first. You can claim your peace right now, not as arrogance, but as responsibility. This is my mind. This is my heart. I'm the steward here, nobody else. And I'm choosing to stop outsourcing my stability to things I can't control. This doesn't mean you don't feel things. It doesn't mean you don't grieve losses, or feel disappointed when people hurt you, or struggle when life is hard. You're human. Emotions are part of being human, but there's a difference between feeling emotions and being destroyed by them. There's a difference between hurting and making the hurt your identity. There's a difference between being affected by life and being a victim of life. Peace is possible alongside difficulty. Stability is possible alongside challenge. Freedom is possible alongside limitation. Not because you've transcended being human, but because you've finally understood what being human actually means. It means you're aware. It means you're conscious. It means you can observe your thoughts and feelings without being completely identified with them. It means you're more than your circumstances, more than your history, more than other people's opinions, more than your temporary emotional states. And when you know that, really know it, you're free. Not free from difficulty, but free within it. Not free from people's behavior, but free from needing people's behavior to be different for you to be okay. That's what I want for you. That's what this entire conversation has been about. Not teaching you techniques to manage your reactions better, but showing you a completely different way of understanding what's happening when someone bothers you. Because when you see it clearly, you realize there's actually nothing to manage. There's just reality happening, and you aware of it. And in that awareness, there's complete freedom. So let me bring this all together for you. We've covered 7 principles, 7 ways of seeing clearly. First, separate the event from the story. Most of what bothers you is the story you're telling about what happened, not what actually happened. Second, other people's opinions are none of your business. They're revealing their internal world, not making statements about your worth. Third, virtue is the only measure that matters. Wisdom, Justice, courage, temperance, those are your metrics, not popularity or approval. Fourth, hurt people, and it's never about you. People's behavior comes from their pain, not from your inadequacy. Fifth, you can't control people, only your response. Stop trying to change others and focus on your own choices. Sixth, love people exactly as they are, then decide. Accept reality while maintaining wise boundaries. And seventh, your peace is your responsibility, not their achievement. Stop waiting for external conditions to grant you peace that was always available internally. These aren't just ideas. These are maps back to freedom, and you can start applying them immediately, right now, today. The next time someone says something that bothers you, pause. Just pause for 10 seconds. Feel what's happening in your body. Notice the heat, the tension, the automatic defensiveness, and then ask, what's the actual event here? What story am I adding to it? Am I taking personally something that's really about them? That pause, that simple moment of awareness, it changes everything. Because you're no longer reacting automatically, you're responding consciously. You're seeing clearly, instead of being swept away by your triggered story. Start there, just with the pause, just with the awareness. You don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to be some enlightened master who's never bothered by anything. You're human. You're going to get triggered. You're going to take things personally. You're going to forget everything I've said and react from old patterns. That's okay. That's normal. That's part of the process. The practice isn't perfection. The practice is coming back. It's noticing when you've been swept away and gently returning to clarity again and again, as many times as it takes. And over time, something shifts. The old patterns loosen, the automatic reactions slow down, the space between trigger and response widens, and you find yourself standing in the middle of chaos, feeling the full impact of it, and not being destroyed by it. Not because you've built walls around your heart, but because you've finally understood that the part of you that's aware of being bothered can never itself be bothered. The consciousness that notices pain is never itself in pain. The awareness that sees difficulty is never itself in difficulty. You are that awareness. You always have been. You just forgot for a while. You identified so completely with your thoughts and feelings and circumstances that you thought you were them. But you're not. You're the space in which all of that happens. And when you remember that, when you really get that, everything changes. People can still say cruel things, and you'll notice it. You'll feel the impact, but it won't shatter you. It won't become a crisis about your worth. It'll just be someone said something cruel. That's what happened. That's all that happened. And from that clarity, you can respond however you want. You can set a boundary. You can create distance. You can speak up or stay silent. You can forgive or not forgive. Whatever feels right to you, whatever aligns with your integrity. But you're choosing from freedom, not from woundedness. You're responding from clarity, not from reactivity. And that makes all the difference. I want you to hear this, really hear it. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not weak for feeling things deeply. You've just been taught to give your power away to every passing opinion, every harsh word, every disappointment, every person who didn't know how to love you well. And today, right now, you're taking it back. Not aggressively, not through force, but through understanding, through seeing clearly, through recognizing what was always true, that you are not what happens to you. You're not what people say about you. You are the awareness that watches it all, the space that holds it all, the stillness beneath every storm. You are already whole. You were always whole. And nothing anyone does or says can change that truth. Because that truth exists prior to circumstances. It exists prior to opinions. It exists prior to anything external. You are whole because wholeness is your nature. Not something you achieve, but something you remember. Not something you earn, but something you recognize. Not something fragile that can be broken, but something fundamental that was never at risk. And when you live from that remembering, when you stand in that recognition, you're free. Not free from difficulty, but free within it. Not free from pain, but free from being destroyed by pain. Not free from people, but free from needing people to be different for you to be okay. That's what I want for you. That's what's possible. Not someday when you're healed enough, or strong enough, or wise enough. Right now, exactly as you are, in the middle of whatever mess you're in, freedom is available. You just have to claim it. You just have to remember. You just have to see clearly. So if this resonated with you, if something here shifted even slightly, I'd love to know. Leave a comment and tell me which of these 7 principles hit you hardest. Which one are you going to practice first? What situation in your life needs this kind of clarity right now? I want to hear from you. Not because I need validation, I'm past that, I hope you can tell. But because this work matters. Because your freedom matters. Because there are other people reading the comments who need to know they're not alone in this struggle. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more of this, more Stoic wisdom applied to modern life, more clarity about how to navigate this complicated human experience with integrity and peace, then subscribe, not as a favor to me, but as a commitment to yourself, as a way of saying, I'm ready to see differently. I'm ready to live differently. I'm ready to stop giving my peace away, because that's what this is really about. Not information, but transformation. Not knowledge, but freedom. And you deserve that freedom. Not because you've earned it or proven yourself worthy, but because freedom is your birthright as a conscious being. You're not alone in this. We're all learning to be unbothered together. One moment, one breath, one choice at a time. We're all practicing seeing clearly. We're all working to remember what we really are underneath all the stories and opinions and circumstances. And some days we remember easily, and some days we forget completely. And both of those are okay. Both of those are part of being human. The practice isn't perfection, it's persistence. It's coming back. It's choosing clarity over and over until it becomes your default. So take what serves you here, leave what doesn't. Try the practices, notice what shifts. Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. This is lifelong work, not a quick fix. But it's work that matters. It's work that changes everything. Now go. Go back to your life with these 7 principles as your companions. Separate events from stories. Remember that opinions are about the other person. Root yourself in virtue. Understand that hurt people. Take responsibility for your responses. Love people as they are while protecting yourself wisely. And claim your peace right now, not someday. Go be free. Not because the world has changed, but because you finally see it clearly. Not because people have become different, but because you've stopped needing them to be. Not because life has gotten easier, but because you've stopped making your peace conditional on life being easy. You are awareness itself, temporarily dressed up as a human being, having this particular experience, meeting these particular challenges. And nothing about these challenges defines you. Nothing about these circumstances limits what's possible for you. Nothing about other people's behavior determines your worth. You are whole. You are free. You always have been. You just forgot for a while. And now you're remembering. And that remembering changes absolutely everything. Go well. Live well. Be free.